All right, recording is on. So if everybody has the agenda doc open, or if you don't, I will paste a link to it in chat. So there it is. The first item on the agenda was the test review. And there are a number of different flakes. But also, I'm not familiar with what the issue is with stale results. Can anybody explain that to me?
No. Ingress GCE ingress. Wait, there's GCI GCE ingress, and then there's ingress GCE E2E.
No, ingress GCE E2E. I fixed something, so that's not flaky. It works. So.
Okay. Stale ingress. Oh, I think that's just because these are new tests, so there's no results.
Ah, okay.
The warning tests are stale. So further down, actually pretty good apart from those.
Okay. Yeah, I looked into a number of the tests so far, and like the ingress GCE E2E flaky one, that looks like that is image pull failures. And there's a heck of a lot of red in that one over the last 24 hours or so.
So we think that's fixed now.
Yeah, it's definitely, so that's not a problem.
Yeah, if anyone's looking at this dashboard in the next week or two, we're doing some shuffling around in the ingress tests. So just ignore them for now.
Okay. One other I noticed was GCI GCE ingress release 1.9, which seems a little relevant since we're getting close to 1.9. And that was flaky, and that looked like it wasn't too flaky, but every now and again there was a leaked default route resource.
Ooh. A default route or just a leaked route resource?
A leaked route named default route something. Default route E9B blah, 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 blah.
Okay, we'll take a look at that. That is kind of weird.
Yeah, it seemed a little intermittent. Other than that, it's pretty green, but it looks like every now and again one gets leaked. I did take a pass on a couple others. Are there any tests that people think are that are flaky that should really be looked at this point? And can we farm that out? I did notice that the Calico tests seem pretty red.
Oh, interesting. Wait, no, that looks like the same. Did you switch? Oh, wait, Calico? Huh.
Yeah, it's kind of way at the bottom. The Calico CNI one looks pretty red for a while, at least in a number of the tests at the top. But the flannel tests look okay, just for reference. So I was kind of wondering maybe what the difference there might be.
Interesting.
Shoot Adam.
Since last year.
Since last year.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I didn't notice.
Yeah, I think we raised this last year, and someone working on Calico was going to look at it. We should probably ping again somehow.
Okay. Any other tests people thought were interesting that we should take a look at quick, or should we move on? All right, I guess we will move on. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is topology-aware routing of services. And it looks like is that correct pronunciation?
Yeah.
Dujun?
Yeah, yes, I'm
I'll
here.
talk a little bit about that quick.
Uh-huh. There's a proposal about the topology of routing services. I have the proposal and have received many comments. I'm doing here about can we target it 1.10 to be a simple implementation? Can we?
I think 110 for an alpha sounds reasonable.
Is it reasonable?
I think so. Does anybody, is it worth talking about what it is a little bit for people who haven't been following on the proposal? Maybe like for 2 minutes or something?
Yeah, I think it would be worth it.
Take it away.
I think the proposal is about to implement the local so-called local services. Same, for example, local zone, local host, and the local RIC to provide a generic way instead of specific way. The proposal is available now, so I don't want to talk it too many details. Anyone who interested in it can trigger the proposal.
And just for background, the proposal started with the question of how do I always talk to the logging agent that is on the same machine as me, right? And we then expanded that a little bit more to encompass how do I talk to the database server that is in the same zone as me, or how do I find the proxy that is in the same rack as me, where zone, machine, rack are effectively arbitrary, right? This was sort of pioneered in pod affinity, the ability to run this pod in the same place, run this pod on the same node that another pod is, where the other pod is defined as a expression of selectors. Parse that 5 times. So pod affinity is out and it's in some use. The storage team has a similar problem of how do I express which machine's volume can be referenced from. And so they've taken what the pod affinity team has done and literally reused the structures to express that affinity on volumes. And so I think it's viable for us to do the same thing with service. It's a little different in service fundamentally because all these other ones are effectively like a 2-term expression. There's a left hand and a right hand. And we're saying, well, the left hand is always the same as me, right? So find me something in the same rack as me. But I think that's fine. And so there's the proposal. And the proposal, thank you, is the simplest possible API to this. It's perhaps almost certainly too simple, but it's a really good starting place to figure out if this is going to work for people.
Yeah, it's a simple version, and we can extend it if there are some real complex use case.
Hi, this is John. I know I put a couple of comments on there, and I don't have I have the same use case for the local on the same node, and because we have doing DNS, it's very latency sensitive, and we don't want to cross a network if we don't have to in our system. But I am concerned about the idea of building in the specific logic for this specific kind of routing directly into Kubernetes, and this is what I talked about a little bit in the comments, that more generally, what we need is a hook point for making a decision about how to route something. And at that point, we can't chase all the different use cases in Kubernetes directly for every single way somebody might want to route something. So what I was suggesting is instead we have those hook points that call out to something else to make a decision. Now, in the case of what you've defined here, that could actually be a piece of code that takes exactly the topology API you've defined, but it puts it in a CRD instead, and it makes a decision based upon the same logic you have. But if it's a hook point and you actually separate those two things, then later on, if somebody else wants to route for some different reason, they don't have to change Kubernetes. They just have to add in some different extension.
So, I mean, you basically just described Istio. And I think that's fantastic, but I think it's far more complicated than what we need for the simplest possible case. And I'm hoping, and maybe I'm wrong, and I haven't read your comments, so I apologize. I'm hoping that the simplest or close to the simplest possible thing will actually satisfy some large body of users, and more complicated stuff will come along as Istio and similar things mature.
Well, I don't think I think Istio does a lot more than just routing, right? So this is that, and I, for example, I couldn't use Istio for my use case because Istio is layer 7 and I'm doing DNS, and it's not really practical.
Istio can handle layer 3, or
Okay.
yeah, they claim to be able to handle. I'm not sure they handle UDP, but I know they handle layer 3, TCP anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, John. I noticed your comment, and I think your comment really makes sense. But for me, I from Huawei cloud. My customers want a level 3 resolution, more level resolution instead of the framework level or application level resolution. So I think the Kubernetes way is really needed.
Yeah, I need layer 3 also. What I'm saying isn't so much about I clearly
More low level resolution.
But nonetheless, I mean I don't think what I'm suggesting is actually more complicated than what you're suggesting, and maybe I introduced it with this whole la notion of generalized policy that made it seem really complicated. It's actually just about where you put the code. Do you put the code in Kubernetes, or do you put an extension point in Kubernetes and put the code somewhere else? That's really the main threat.
Given like the IP tables and the IPVS proxiers that we have today, both of which are effectively kernel configurators with no data path interference, how do you see that decision being made in real time without intercepting data path like Istio does?
Well, actually, I mean, it's the same question really I was suggesting we do it at service discovery time because then you don't need to worry about the data path. But I mean, I guess, how are you suggesting it in yours as well to do kube proxy? What kube proxy configuration, I guess, are you suggesting? Because all this is about where kube proxy gets its metadata from. Does it get it from some abstraction that exists in Kubernetes, or does it get it from a CRD? And if it's a CRD, then maybe it's some plug-in to kube proxy or something. So it's not.
Oh, you mean that it would be statically configured from metadata, not dynamically configured through, like, on a per request basis?
Correct. I'm suggesting and maybe I'm not fully understanding the proposal, but I'm not actually suggesting any mechanism that would be different. This is about how you configure it. This is how you configure it. Do you configure it as data on a core Kubernetes abstraction like service, or is it just a separate thing that defines how you want to do this routing? You hook point in the different layers, the different control points, right? You have different control points in the stack. You have the service discovery piece, which happens before anything. You have the kube proxy, which is doing the actual route, the IP tables, which is doing the actual routing. Then you got kube proxy that configures IP tables. So we would have to, kube proxy or whatever is going to configure IP tables would have to read this other CRD rather than reading things off the service. But if you did that, then you'd have to somehow put a plug-in to manage those CRDs within kube proxy. That's what I mean by the hook point, the extension point of kube proxy.
Can I try a question here?
Yeah.
So the plug point you're talking about is plugging in the logic that interprets the CRD into the actual IP tables rules.
Correct.
And what if the proxy isn't in IP tables mode?
Well, what would you do today with the current proposal in that case? It's not really any different.
Well, the difference is that in the current proposal, there is a fixed semantics, and all the different proxy implementations can implement that semantics.
but they have to implement that semantics rather than
Right. But the point is that the change you're making is you're changing from a centrally defined semantic, which can have distributed various implementations, to no defined semantics, and now you've got an end-to-end problem.
So what you're saying, I see what you're saying, that the kube proxy plugin wouldn't know how to interpret that into IP tables rules because it's not making the routing decision itself. It's instead trying to set up IP tables to make that routing decision. And so it's in order to make that work for kube proxy and IP tables, you'd have one implementation that interprets that logic, and then to make it work in some other mode, you'd have to have a different set of logic to interpret that.
And then when the eBPF mode comes in, then you have to have another one for that. And when the next thing after that comes in, and I don't think that part is tenable. But I actually misinterpreted, perhaps in your favor. If the CRD here was effectively a mapping of, I'm not sure how to express it, but a mapping of which endpoints should be chosen from which nodes or something like that for each service, which sounds like a fairly complicated structure. But if it was, like today, let me back up a second. What we're proposing with this is there is a semantic. The semantic is look at the labels, pick the ones that have the label that matches for an arbitrary label, but all we have is the labels, right? And in fact, we only have one expression, which is equals equals. And we could talk about whether we need more expressions or not. But it's a pretty simple core. And from that, we can produce the list of, for each node, for each service, which endpoint should you choose. If we took that logic out and put it into a CRD or something, then you could have any arbitrary process running that calculation, figuring out in real time for each node, for each service, which backends should I choose, and we could consume that. But it would not be, how do I turn that into IP tables? Because you don't get a whole lot of freedom in terms of what semantic you get to express. This is the list of backends to choose in this in this order, maybe with this weight, but that's about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's right, exactly. So the extension point is fairly simple. It's give me that list of endpoints for this particular service and this particular client. And whether that, and you're right, that if that's the extension point, then we don't need to worry about it being different for all these different things. They all use the same extension point, and they configure whatever they're going to configure in the same way they would where the decision made somewhere else. So that's exactly what I'm trying to say, right? That logic to boil down a client and its destination service into a list of endpoints doesn't need to live in Kubernetes.
That's interesting to me because actually one of the questions I raised on this proposal was it sort of feels awkward that I'm defining this in the service, which is sort of the server side, when it really feels more like a client side or an administrative policy, not a server side policy. But service is the only place we have to configure it. I'd like to think about your idea a little bit. I'm not sure that we can have service depend on CRDs that way, but I need to think about the rules there.
So I had sort of come to the same conclusion as John when I was taking a look at the proposal, but maybe for slightly different reasons. And on that point, it seemed, and I know you were trying to keep things as simple as possible and create the simplest possible API for it, but I thought that John's comment about, well, this seems like something that could be generalized, kind of rang true for me. And so I was kind of wondering about, is topology the right name for this kind of stuff? Could we achieve a slightly more generalized result by not using the word topology, but just kind of, having some arbitrary mechanism for what we've just described about selecting a particular endpoint to happen, but not encode any kind of like topology meaning on that. And then that, looking at some of the sample code for what kube proxy would do, it's only taking a look at node labels. And so my thought there was, well, yes, this sounds like a great application of labels. And then maybe we don't need any kind of external plugin or something like that, because people could just manipulate labels. But then if the only labels that are available for this decision are labels on the node, perhaps that's a little too limiting.
So one thing that makes this sort of complicated, I mean, in some sense, what you're saying is the service wants an endpoint selector with a way of expressing some relationship, right?
Right.
Except that endpoint.
Filter. Right. It's filter, not selector.
Yes, sure. The problem though is that endpoints, as currently spec'd, are this monolithic thing that isn't individually addressable. And in fact, this is one of the things that we identified as needs to be fixed in V2, which would probably make that overall problem easier.
Yeah, but that doesn't seem like a big problem to me. If you have an API to call out to for doing a filtering, certainly it can be passed a structure, say a list of tuples, where the tuple has an endpoint plus whatever else you would like a V2 endpoint to have.
Yeah, the problem is that the endpoint structures are already getting large, and we can't realistically jam too much more in them until we figure out how we're going to prevent the boundless growth. And that's
if that's a concern, then it seems like putting topology maps into the endpoints addresses might explode that quite a bit.
That is true. That is something that we need to figure out, and it may, in fact, be a problem.
So I guess I just try to step back a minute again. I think that my understanding of what we're saying is that we need to define an API extension, or I don't know if that's the word for it, but we need an extension point and an API that says, here's the information about, I need to make a choice in where I want to route this connection to what endpoint. And I get back a list of endpoints in some sort of order. And that's it. Once we define that API, then this proposal could go forward outside of Kubernetes, right? This proposal could become just what does that API look like? And then at the different control points, kube proxy and wherever, that piece of code needs to implement that control point and make that request. And I don't think it's necessarily a service depending on a CRD there. It's a service depending on making an API call to something which may be an extension. Absolutely, and whether that's reasonable within the Kubernetes.
Well, the choices we have are basically CRD or first-class resource, and I'm not sure that CRD would work, so it means we would have to be thinking of this in terms of a first-class resource. It's interesting. I feel like I need to think more about how it might look. I'm struggling a little bit with what would the resource look like that carried the mapping of, for each node, for each service, choose these backends.
Well, actually, that's not quite what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting that from the point of view of kube proxy, what you have is an API. And that API, you pass in that you have this service coming from this source, with the client coming from this source, and give me back a list of those endpoints. What makes that determination on the other side? I don't know. Kube proxy doesn't know. It just makes an API call. That could be some code directly in there that's interpreting some CRD, or that could be some guy on a chatbot. Just joking, but like it's anything, right? It's just an API.
So what needs to be standardized then would be, say, a first-class object that just points to an API endpoint that gets called, plus probably passes some configuration data along to it.
What question is, what form is that API going to be expressed in? Is it going to be expressed as a Kubernetes-style API or something else?
This is a
the only standard we have right now is sort of a Kubernetes-style API.
Not true. We have lots of callouts, lots of plugins. When it's a functional style API, we have lots of RPCs. And I think what's being described here is a function, not managing some other state. And so an RPC style interface sounds appropriate.
Well, the difference is that in almost all those cases, or all that I can think of, the behavior is the thing that we can rely, like we don't break portability in the sense that if I schedule a container on any Kubernetes cluster, the container runtime interface ensures that container runs. And the semantic and the API I give it are always the same. And if I am picturing what you guys are sketching, how do I ensure that a user who said, I want you to always choose the same backends in the same rack as me? How do I know that the plugins you choose to implement always guarantee that semantic? Or do they not need to? Like where does the portability stop?
I don't think that semantic is guaranteed as part of the service. That semantic is guaranteed as part of the policy, is what I would call it, that's being defined. And I think what Mike's suggesting is that, well, maybe you have different ways. You've got the default thing that we already do, right? Which is just round robin or whatever it is, or probabilistic. And that would be the default if you don't specify any pointer to some.
Well, the thing we already do is no filtering. It uses all endpoints.
Right.
We're talking about a filtering API. So the default is no filter.
Okay, well, it could be filtering and waiting, but yes, okay. The default is no filter.
So where do you see the configuration? Like, how do I, as somebody who's providing the Datadog service, how do I say, this is a per node service and I always want you to use the per node version?
We would have to, I haven't thought it through that deeply, because I was really just bringing up a concern I had with the way that we were building it into Kubernetes. Mm-hmm. But I think what Mike was suggesting made a little bit of sense to me, although I have to think about it more, which is you have some sort of API object, first-class API object that defines some pointer essentially to a routing policy or filtering policy decision maker, something to that effect. It's not clear to me yet.
I mean, it seems like it would be much simpler and more sort of Kubernetes style to be declarative here and to say, instead of me polling some service to make routing decisions, you declare them as a resource in Kubernetes, right? Again, for each node, I should be able to look up my node. For each service, you're going to give me a list of which backends I should choose in which order. And I can then program my IP tables based on that. And because we did it as a Kubernetes resource, I can watch it. So whenever it changes, I will immediately be notified and I can update my routing table based on that. And there's no call out, there's no RPC, but whoever is the actual policy generator can program this resource, sort of like network policy, right? You can declare it.
Or like endpoints, really, right? That's how
it is sort of like endpoints, but it's a little bit more complicated because now it has like 2 dimensions instead of 1.
So one suggestion is that this probably should go on the mailing list.
That's a good point.
Yeah. I was going to, sort of cut this off since we spent about 20, almost 30 minutes on it. Not to, if people are still want to discuss it, mailing list is great. The issue is great. I think we brought out some really good points here.
Yeah, this was helpful. I'm certainly going to think about that, John and Mike. I think there's something there. It's an interesting idea. It certainly has an opportunity to follow a lot of patterns that have been established already through Kubernetes. So let's continue to chew on that, and we'll take it to the issue, the proposal here.
Excellent, great.
Thanks, guys.
All right, next item on the agenda is 110 planning. There's let's see, where did it go? There's the features spreadsheet link at the top as well, which I spent some time today trying to update and get a current status. So for that, I'd like to just kind of run through the feature spreadsheet from there and see if we have anything else that we can update. So if you open that, that actually, I think, defaults to 1.7, but there's a tab on the bottom for 1.9. Actually, we want to go to 1.10, sorry. Well, let's start at 1.9. We probably just want to copy this over. Is there anything in this list that people see, if you have it open for the 1.9 features, that we need to update based on current 1.9 status?
I'm sorry, Dan, I'm a little lost. In the
Yep.
document Kubernetes 1.10 release schedule, there's a set of handy links. The feature tracking sheet is not a link.
Yep. So basically, I mean, that's there's a lot of schedule info there and stuff like that, feature freeze, etc. But if you look at the top of the SIG Network agenda, we kind of have our features spreadsheet link there in the important links part, and that's what I was kind of looking at.
Thank you.
Yep. Let's see. We probably want to duplicate that tab and rename it. Okay, so I just created a 1.10 features tab at the bottom, or sheet. So if people just want to jump over to that, and we can take a look at those items. The first item is IPv6 support. Is that something, I mean, based on all the discussions at KubeCon and whatnot, it's going to be mostly there for 1.9 already. Do we want to say that it's going to be more than alpha in 1.10?
V6 team. Anybody?
What was that, Tim?
What does the V6 team think?
What does the V6 team think for its status in the 1.10 release?
I think what we have to get done is we have to finish getting the CI working. The documentation is almost there, and then start on the dual stack. And I'm not sure in the 1.10 timeframe that we can get any more completed than multiple IPs per pod.
Would you? Do you want to block the beta of 1.6 on dual stack, or do you want to proceed? Sorry, of V6. Do you want to proceed with V6 single family support before we proceed with dual stack? Is there a reason to go one way or the other?
Yeah, I'd be looking for your guidance on that. I would think that having a beta just single family is not that useful.
Okay.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't have any real experience to draw on here.
what do we need to do to go beta? Is it just having CI and the proper documentation, or for the single family?
Yeah, more or less. But if you think it's not really that useful, if you think this is merely an enabler for dual stack and dual stack's what's really important, then let's not rush and rushing makes mistakes. If we want to leave it as alpha and try to put all our energy into dual stack instead, then that's fine too.
Yeah, that would be my vote.
So does that mean that this feature probably will not move out of alpha or whatever for 1.10 because it requires the multiple pod IP?
Yeah, I think that's what it means, yeah.
Okay. And for that is currently in the feature spreadsheet as not started and low priority, except we've marked IPv6 support as high priority. So I'm thinking we should probably move support multiple pod IP addresses up to a high priority.
Yeah.
I think maybe we should split it, right? What we're really trying to say is there's two levels of multiplicity here, right? One is multiple network interfaces or network attachments. And the other is multiple addresses on one attachment or interface.
Correct. So sorry, Dane, I want to back up a second. I'm thinking about single family V6 only and whether that's useful. And I can think of places where that would be possibly useful. Maybe I'm alone, but we've got some things that we're thinking about that might be interesting for.
I guess what the question would be, what if you move it to beta? What is that?
Yeah. I mean, there's no real API to it, right? It's not like we'd be cementing a field name or something. It's just sort of we're ungating it.
It would allow broader sort of people to kick their tires.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, somebody mentioned here, like nobody tests alphas really. And if we really want to get some miles in the V6 support and shake out any issues, maybe it would make sense to just finish the CI, call it beta in 110 and tell people it's single family. We're working on the dual family support, but single family support for V6 we consider to be beta and go nuts.
I thought beta did imply more stability.
It does imply more stability. I guess.
I mean, more precisely, I thought it inhibited more changes and was more inhibitive of changes in the future.
Sure, but the nice thing here is there's no real API to this, right? It's not like we added anything to any API structs for V6 that I can remember. It was really just plumbing capability through all of the components, right?
Right.
I have a question regarding that, Tim. So how are we going to add the ability to have dual family and to have that configuration in the Cube API server, for example, or sorry, in the controller manager? How do we add the pod sider for dual family?
Yes,
Don't we need changes on their side?
So to do dual family, there's a whole bunch of changes that we need. And I started writing some of that stuff down. And we had a little discussion at KubeCon about it, but I don't think we've fully enumerated all of the places that we'll need to touch. But you just touched on 2 or 3 of them.
I wasn't at KubeCon, so sorry.
Sorry, no, it's fine. It was really like literally a hallway conversation. I think it was maybe 10 of us sitting in the hall, and we just started just to sketch out all the things that we need to change, and there's a lot. But the sooner we get started, the better. But I don't think that should block single family V6 support.
In fact, let's say if you went to beta and something did not work with single family, that would be a bug, right?
Yes.
The other component.
Right.
So it's kind of sounding to me like we should try to do beta for single family for 110.
That's sort of my feeling. I mean, I would like to know that it doesn't regress, and having it in beta means more people are going to have access to it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, that implies CI, and you need the CI anyway, so maybe might as well.
We need that anyway, yeah.
Right.
We don't want regressions introduced.
I'm reminded again of a technical question here. In V6, your average node gets 2 main addresses rather than 1. So which one, or are we doing multiple addresses now, or what?
You mean you get the link local and the regular V6 address? Is that what you mean by 2?
No. In addition to the link local, there is the permanent one, and there's the obfuscated or temporary one, or trans.
Which one currently gets reported for node addresses and for pod addresses? If you know.
The pod addresses is the one that whatever the CNI allocates.
Okay. How about for node? Does it use link local for node, or does it use like the site or global scope?
It uses, the global. Yep.
Okay.
Well, again, a node will have a permanent address and a transient address.
Yeah, so what Dane's saying is it just picks one of those because both of those should work to contact the node on. And for now, just pick one of those.
Yeah, I think there's an algorithm where it for the node address, it looks for the gateway, where the gateway's on, and then picks a global address on that. It prefers global. I think that's how it works.
And you can also specify the node IP.
Well, slow down. The permanent and the transient are both global, right?
Yes.
And the transient changes from time to time.
Yeah, I mean, that's also true.
So I think the question, though, is that for the beta, is it required to support the transient to make it.
I was just trying to find out what's going on.
Oh, I see.
So, I mean, it's obviously the simplest thing to do is to use the permanent address because it doesn't change. But I haven't heard anybody even say that they identify it correctly.
By transient, you mean the privacy extensions address?
Yes, yeah, that one.
Yeah, I haven't enabled privacy extensions. Do we want to?
Well, it's not a question of you enabling it for Kubernetes. It's a question of when you install Kubernetes on a cluster, if the person installing the OS enables temporary addresses, then you'll have to deal with them because you'll get 3 different IPv6 ones. So, I mean, to me, it sounds like this should be an issue that gets opened and then it gets addressed at some point, and maybe it becomes a bug for 110. Who knows? But
I thought it picked the one that had the gateway on it.
Right.
But both of them
I thought there's an algorithm that it goes through and it picks the one that has the gateway. And
but both of them will have the gateway though, because the privacy address has the same prefix as the permanent one. It's just the last bits are obfuscated, so you don't leak your MAC address out to the internet. So anyway, it sounds like there should be an issue filed for this, and then we can keep discussing it there in the issue, and we just make sure that we're aware of this potential problem.
Yeah, it sounds like a great question. Thanks, Mike. But I don't know that it should block.
No, I agree. It sounds like it's just a bug that be filed and fixed.
I mean, it could also even just be a doc issue. Just say, don't enable the privacy addresses in your v6 cluster at this point, but that will be fixed by GA.
Well, that doesn't have to do with the bug, right? I mean,
yeah,
with the bug until we fix it.
All right, so that's IPv6. Deprecation of extensions, v1 beta 1 network policy. I think Dan Winship had said he didn't know anything about that, and Chris Luciano, who does not appear to be on the call. Anybody else know the current status of that, and is that targeted for 110?
I swear I reviewed that PR.
I mean, we put docs in saying it's deprecated.
Good enough.
I don't know exactly what this feature, what stuff it entails though, so I don't know how far that gets us.
Did we do that before 1.9 or after 1.9?
I think after.
Okay, then we have to let 110 be the overlap release.
Does anybody have the issue number for that offhand so that I can plug it into the feature spreadsheet, or if you do, just plug it right in there?
Next.
Okay, well, if anybody does get that issue, put it in so we can track it that way. We also have deprecate KubeNet. If anybody has better status than I on that one, but I know that there are some outstanding things for CNI with respect to port map and some other bits for KubeNet that still need to be spun out. So I think that's still in progress, and that's probably not going to hit 110.
Gene?
I think I can pick that up. So I think I'm just thinking, so instead of just deprecate Kubernetes, what we can. So
we get to delete some code.
Yeah, so you want to? Yeah, I think I also have some thoughts on to make a long running demo for those.
That's a different question. Daniel's name is on here, but he's sort of focused elsewhere right now. I don't know if Chris is here. I don't think so. I don't think anybody is actively looking at this. This is one of those bugs that's been open for a year and a half. Like we all sort of think we should do it, but it's not important enough.
I mean, I would say it's not in progress. There are still bits of it. I know there's a bandwidth shaping plugin that's shown up for CNI upstream, and that's one of the things that KubeNet currently does. So there are bits and pieces, but I don't think anybody is, focusing on this specifically, but there are pieces of it that are actually moving forward.
Yeah, actually, I know Daniel, he has some like a REPL. Maybe, I don't know the status. I can check with him.
Yeah, Daniel started some work, but I don't think it was far enough along to say like this will land in 110.
Jing, can you investigate and update that line then?
Yeah, sure.
Jing on our side will take the action to figure out if anything is happening there and what the status is.
Yep.
Not commitment to finish this.
Okay, sounds good. And then also there were the investigations into the point-to-point plugin as well, which I'm not sure what the status of those was, but I know people have been looking at that. All right, so
I'm just updating the deprecation thing. That did make it into 1.9, so we can kill it in 1.10.
All right.
I look forward to that pull request.
Should I just delete the row then, Dan, or just mark it done?
I marked it done. I mean, it's not actually gone. It's done for, well, it's marked deprecated for 1.9, so it still has to be removed for 1.10.
Yeah, so the action for 110 is actually deleted.
Yeah, so can you just update the description there to delete extensions v1 beta 1 policy? Okay, next one is propose the future of ingress.
So that one, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, hi Dan, do you mean the ingress class proposal?
So actually that one I had a question on, and I think we should add it as a row.
Okay.
Where that one is going. And then this one is more related to the discussion, the SIG Network deep dive at KubeCon. And I'll hopefully be sending out some kind of survey to Kubernetes users so we get like some data as to where to go. That's kind of where I think at least in 110 we'll probably collect data and start discussions.
Mm-hmm. Agree. Hi, Bowie, do you mean we can send the survey to the users to bring more discussion?
Yeah, I think given the feedback and the enthusiasm from the crowd, that definitely people have opinions.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Just a small question. Is there any doc or issue for that already? Or no?
No, not this time. So I'll
Okay.
open up soon.
Okay, thanks.
So procedural question here, Tim. At what point, I'm just looking at the time left for this meeting and if we should switch over to some of the other items like the Pod Ready++, or if we should continue trying to burn down this list and keep it updated. The only reason why maybe we'd want to continue doing that is that we have freezes in the near future.
Yeah, I think that's the right thing to do. Other proposals
Okay. All right, sounds good. Okay, so the next item was IPVS Kube Proxy. I had changed that to GA. I mean, it got beta, I think, in 1.9. Is that correct?
Yes, in
Okay.
1.9 is beta.
Beta, okay.
And the CI is green, and the document is almost there.
Okay.
But I'm not sure what is the scope of we can go to GA. I don't know the scope.
GA really is going to mean confidence in the implementation since there's really no API around it. And that's going to come with users. So probably the yardstick for going GA is convincing ourselves that enough users have switched to it that we believe it works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's used in Huawei and Tencent production environment in China. They are very big companies in China.
Great.
Yeah.
So
and the IPVS proxy doesn't change any API, you know.
Right. There's no API there. We'll want to look at it on our side and see that we're like, I would use me as a yardstick for being confident, or me, the other people in this room, I guess. And maybe we should see if we can get the Azure folks or like one of the other major providers to invest some time into figuring out whether they think it's viable, and if so, then go.
So when we mean kubeproxy will use IPVS and IPVS as GA, does that mean the default operation of kubeproxy would use IPVS?
No, I think that's two different steps.
Okay. The reason I'm raising that is we enable Kubernetes on DCOS with Mesos, and the problem that we are seeing is that kubeproxy basically assumes that it is the only entity using IPVS, which is not true in some of the platforms, DCS being one of them. And so I don't know if it should be a criteria for GA that, it needs to be more aware of. There might be other entities. It's similar to using, sharing IP tables with other entities. So it doesn't do that.
We talked about this earlier in the IPVS design, and we didn't have anybody who could defend the sharing position. So I think your feedback is very welcome.
Sorry about that.
We couldn't find anybody else with whom we decided we needed to share, and we couldn't figure out exactly how to understand what that even meant. So if this is a problem for Mesosphere, then that's an opportunity for us to actually consider fixing this.
Awesome. So should I just create an issue for it and then we take it from there, or how do we go about it?
Yeah, create the issue and tag it as area IPVS. And
okay. It's a default. I know. Great. Thanks a lot.
Cool.
Okay. So I will have marked that as a target for GA for 110. Next item is core DNS as cluster default DNS. It looks like at least the documentation all got added for 1.9. So I'm just wondering what's left on that. Is it going to get declared as beta for 110?
We'd love to have it declared as beta. We did in the proposal. We discussed that in order to be beta, we need to provide an upgrade path that takes the kubedns config map and uses it to configure core DNS during the upgrade process. And so we are working on that. The other question I would have is similar to the one with IPVS. How do we build the confidence to go? It's not GA, so it's not easy, but what's the threshold level for confidence to go from alpha to beta, and how do we build that confidence?
So at least for the beta, it would be great to get that integrated into the CI somehow.
Yes. Francois is on, he could probably discuss how our progress on that.
But in the CI, we already have we already have in the how do you call that, test integration dashboard. We already have a kubeadmin GCE core DNS.
Oh, okay.
That was done for alpha, yes. Oh, but committed maybe up after alpha. So that is done. What is not done? I did a test manually for IPv6 with cluster IPv6. So as soon as we have integration test for IPv6, then I can add the one for core DNS.
Let me see.
So just to add some data over here, we have actually seen some issues with IPv6 and IPVS where we saw kernel crashes on Red Hat Enterprise Linux and CentOS. This is with IPVS when you're using DCOS. This is not the kubeproxy IPVS. But it's something that, have we tested IPv6 with IPVS? Do we have a CI for that on different distros?
That's a great question.
Because I mean, there are issues with IPv6 support for IPVS. And I mean, in our internal CI, we use IPVS for our internal load balancer and DCOS. And we've seen a bunch of crashes with IPv6 when we enable it on IPVS.
So can we just say the V6 team and the IPVS team need to get in a virtual room and talk about how to test this?
Yes, I think that would be perfect.
All right, sounds good. So can we commit to beta for 110?
I don't see any reason why beta would be a problem.
All right. Ingress class proposal API design doc, that was marked as done before, so should we just remove that row from the 110 release, or is there a second stage of this that we could mark down?
I think it needs to hold until we figure out the rest of what we're doing with Ingress, which is on Bowie right now.
Okay. So does that mean I should delete the row for now?
Yeah, I think delete the row is probably appropriate.
All right, it is gone. Windows Cube Proxy, I changed that to go, or to ask, does it go to beta or alpha? It wasn't marked as alpha in anything, but I know it got into 1.9, right? So, or no, it hasn't gotten into 1.9 yet. I forget what the status actually is.
I forget too. I lose track of which was in before and which is in after. Anybody from Windows here? All right.
Well, for the moment, let's mark alpha, since I'm pretty sure code is there for 1.10.
Okay.
And then I guess we'll ping people on that. Next one is network policy egress, CIDR to GA. Dan, did you have an update on that?
So, I mean, people at the meeting at KubeCon said that they had implemented it. So I guess people who have implemented it should be reporting whether it works for them. I guess, yeah. I don't know exactly what the criterion is, but
I'd like to know that the major implementations have support for it. I know for a while Weave did not. I think they do now.
So this is a cargo implementation? Or?
No, this is the API.
API.
I would like to hear that the major 3 or 4 implementations have support for it before we GA it. That's my only real gate, and feedback from their users.
I guess for major implementations, we could go with the ones that are currently mentioned in the Kubernetes docs as having network policy support, which I think is Weave and Calico and something else.
Weave, Calico, Romana, Contiv. Was Contiv one of those?
I feel like there are only 3. But yeah. Okay, I guess I can, Dan, you want to assign me to look into figuring this out?
Sure.
One thing. So I've heard that Bowie will send something to the users requesting for comments. Can you also send about the network policy egress some questions about the details how to implement the network policy, not the implementation themselves, but the actual policy?
I think it's worthwhile to keep those as 2 separate topics because ingress is going to be contentious.
Okay.
But it seems reasonable if we want to send out a second one to ask people about how they're doing with egress policy, although to some sense the lack of complaints is a decent signal.
It can also mean people are not trying.
It could.
I mean, typically these survey, you don't want too long because the drop-off will be quite severe when it gets beyond a certain number of questions.
Okay.
All right. Last one, multiple pod IP addresses. I mean, that one's been around forever as well. And as far as I know, nobody is actively working on that yet, but obviously we discussed it is kind of a dependency for IPv6.
Well, again, half of it is. All right. There's 2 kinds of multiplicity here. One of them is needed for IPv6.
Yep. Yeah. Correct. To me, it doesn't seem like this will hit 110.
Unless somebody's stepping up to drive it right now, probably not.
Yep. And that driving would have to happen in like the next 3 weeks, which seems like pretty short deadline. So for the moment, I have
a few proposals if anybody has them. I started on something that maybe I think I forgot to share with the SIG. Oops. I'll send out my notes on it if I didn't already send them out, but I don't have enough there to go for the implementation in 110.
Yep. Please do. Send a reminder if you already sent it, and I'll look at it. I'd like to maybe see if we can get this going.
All right. There's also pretty active discussion on or not pretty active, but there is still active discussion on that issue that's marked there in the doc.
Okay. Yeah, I swear I wrote something up and maybe I just didn't send it.
All right. Well, I'll leave that one alone for target release status. If something shows up in the next few weeks, then we can change that if we need to. I also think we should obviously skip multiple networks for the moment, since that's clearly not going to happen for a 110 release.
Look at the time. Look at the time.
Other efforts. Yep, exactly. So if nobody has anything else to discuss.
Hi, Dan.
Yeah.
Can we add the the topology aware routing service to one point in time, and we can keep discussing. I mean,
sure. That seems like a good goal for Alpha. If we miss it, we miss it. But if we can hit it, great.
Yeah.
All right.
That doc is editable by anyone, so you can edit it. You can add it.
Thank you.
All right, added it.
Thank you.
Cool. Link your GitHub issue there.
I just pasted that in.
Okay. Oh, perfect.
Perfect. Cool.
All right.
Okay. We will see everybody in 2 weeks then.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.